I'm doing community acupuncture, and the only challenge I've had is convincing patients to come in for a private session when I feel the area needs to be treated directly and can't be accessed from a zero-gravity chair. The difference in price being the issue barrier. Curious to hear if others have had this experience and how they've successfully addressed it. So this is common and this is normal, and here's what usually happens, and I've fallen into this myself plenty. In fact, I remember when I was in school, I was talking to a business guy and telling him my kind of grand vision for practice and how I wanted to have, more of a conventional private room, normal acupuncture price point, slightly lucrative kind of situation, and also combine the best of both worlds and do community acupuncture and get that kind of community service feeling, and also be able to make this medicine accessible to people who can't afford it otherwise. I get it. I wanted to do all of it. And the guy told me, he's like, well, you don't want to mix those people, and his advice, I didn't like his advice. I still don't like his advice because his rationale was that there would be wealthy people and poor people, and if you mix those together, then you're going to have, some kind of weird situation. I don't agree with that at all. I think mixing people from different backgrounds is fantastic. What we want to look at is mixing people with the right sophistication levels. There's a lot of personality traits. Like, you don't have to keep people separated by class. That was this business guy's advice. However, he was right about one thing, which is it's hard to mix those models. It's hard to keep track of all of your different offers for all the different types of people. So one of the things about specializing, and we talk about this a lot here because this is a distinction I've had to come to with specializing, is there's different types of specialization. We can specialize in a problem we treat. We can specialize in the method we use. We can specialize in the types of people we serve, right? All these different kinds of things. When you specialize, it makes life easier because there's a lot of stuff you can just tune out. You don't have to focus on it. So if you specialize in reproductive or fertility or headaches or whatever it is, you don't have to pay attention to all the other things because there's so much. This is complex, right? We had at our last summit, one of the members was saying about how big the program is, and then everybody's like, yeah, this program is a monster, and I'm like, I know, it's a beast, but that's the nature of a complex subject, right? So if we want to know all these things and dive in, even to just go online, that's a specialty. There's a lot of stuff we have to learn with that if you want to be really, really good at it. There's a whole larger field of information that we don't have to pay attention to depending on the decisions we make, right? So even when we do narrow it down, it's still complex and it's still big if we want to go deep. Same thing with you might specialize in something that many practitioners consider mundane, right? Like, back pain or something. But if you specialize in that, holy smokes, it is complex and it is deep, and you have to know a lot of stuff if you want to really be a specialist. So specializing can help us focus, but the same thing could be specializing with our business model. Instead of trying to accommodate every single person's kind of situation and have a model that has one piece for these people, one piece for those people, one piece for these people, plus I'm doing house calls, plus I want to go online, it gets a lot easier when we focus in. Now, most practitioners can handle having a general practice or a semi-specialized practice with brick and mortar and then developing an online specialized offering that emerges from that. And we've covered this in depth at our events. It's in the program, how to do a hybrid model, how to have seed crystal beta testers, how to set yourself up for long-term success, right? You can usually handle those two things, but what gets tricky is when we try to do everything. And it's the same thing with our herb formulas. It's like we try to do everything at once, and it's a shit show, right? You can't dry damp, tonify qi, nourish yin, move blood, move liver qi. You try to do all that stuff in one formula, and it's a mess. It's a lot for the body to keep track of. But the same thing with our business models. It's difficult to have a community clinic and a private one-on-one and all that. You can make it work, and I'm going to get to how to make it work. But just framing this is we've already set. Oftentimes we don't even know how hard the thing is that we're trying to do. And the guy I talked to, almost 20 years ago now, he was right, but not for the right reasons. But it is simpler to keep things simple, of course. So this comes up a lot. I'll give another preface here is that, I talk a lot about doing high-ticket annual memberships, especially going online. That's not because that's the only way to do it. It's because that's the stuff that the people in our profession need to hear, because it's possible. And don't let anybody tell you it's not, because I'm doing it. There's people in our group that have learned how to do it. You can do it too. Now, you don't have to. You don't have to run high-ticket. You could run a high-volume, low-price point offer. And we actually were just talking about those this weekend at our summit, depending on the niche, right? There may be some things you want to do that are a little more kind of commodity-based and selling very low-ticket, but to a lot of people. And that's also viable. There's no shame here. My goal is to bring forth a community and certain understandings and distinction levels that enable you to decide how you want to do things and be able to do it very, very, very well. So it might be that two people coming through Doctors Club have vastly different models, but we're supercharging both of them with fractal systems, with clinical clarity, with personal cultivation. So you're better off than you would have been if you didn't know these things. It's not one box you try to jam yourself into. So that being said, I do talk a lot about high ticket, and this has come up in the past. Like, okay, high ticket's great, but what about people who can't afford high ticket, who genuinely need the service? That's just a separate offer. It's a different offer. And you decide if you want to do that and how it can look. And these are the kinds of things that we can shape up here. It's really not a problem. One of the things that I've also brought up in the past is that sometimes there are other people who already have those services and those offers in place. So if you already have a community clinic in your town that you can refer to, they need the volume to make their model work. So if we try to say, well, I want to have a one-on-one and I want to serve an underserved community, but there's already somebody serving an underserved community, send them there. They need the volume. You can focus on what you're doing, and sometimes service and helping people really comes down to pointing them in the right direction. We don't have to micromanage and do every single thing to be of service. So there is something to be said for that, where it's almost selfish to try to I want to serve the community at a very low price point, and that already exists in your town. Send them there. Don't eat away at that person's high volume business model, right? So there's some things to consider. Same thing with online. Now there's no geographical barrier. So if there's already somebody serving your niche online at a very low ticket and they're doing like a good job, maybe you can even develop a relationship, maybe even friendship with that person. Just start sending people there if you want to focus on higher ticket stuff. Where we go with that, there's barriers, right? The barrier to entry for high ticket, there are many barriers. And so those who cross that are more rare. It's a lot easier to put something up online that's very low price point, just kind of blasting things out. So if there's already somebody doing that, they need the volume in order to survive. So instead of trying to find stuff for people that should be in that program, and now you got to keep all these different offers straight, just refer them, right? And that's okay. We can also have charity projects, pet projects, give backs, and things like that. That stuff oftentimes comes later. Even standard business advice, a lot of entrepreneurs in various fields, right? Tech and finance and all these kinds of things. They want to get going and they want to do the charity stuff, and they have to hit a certain threshold before it makes sense. So it's kind of like you have to work on being profitable and sustainable for your organization, whatever that is, even if you're just like one person. I'm like a one-man show, right? For the most part. But you have to make sure that that's sustainable and profitable before you start doing all the give backs. Not always, but you don't have to have guilt about doing it that way, right? Because you can always, if we want to accomplish a lot of stuff, we can't always do it all at once. And sometimes there's a hierarchy. We have to have an order of operations of how we treat patients, how we go through complex chronic cases. There's also an order of operations of how we run the business and the different stages, the different chapters and seasons of that business. So a lot of us have big hearts and we want to do like the give back stuff and make things accessible. And if that is your first step and that makes sense, then go for it. If that's kind of getting friction from the current model you're using, then maybe it's one of those things where you do need to keep it in mind, but just stage it so that you know your thresholds of where your primary business needs to be before you do all the give back stuff. And again, even better if you can refer. So there's the caveats, but really what's going on here is you've got a business model, and this is why it gets kind of tricky, because you're framing people, you're pre-framing people, and you're anchoring them to a very low price for your service and for access to you, for every form of value delivery that you bring literally to the table, right? But in this case, to the recliner, you're pre-framing people that your service, your presence, your attention, all that stuff is anchored to some kind of sliding scale of $15 to $45 or whatever it is. So there are some cases where people need more, and there is a price that comes with that. It's hard to upsell people. It's a lot easier to anchor high and then sell down. And what I mean by that, this is kind of like the common example that comes up with business folks. But when Tesla first came out with the cars, they were crazy expensive. I forget how much they were, $100,000 or something at least. And they're making the sports cars, the Roadster. And that brand got anchored with this very futuristic, very high tech, high performing. It's in a niche of a sports car, right? Later on, they introduced family sedans and that kind of stuff. And the price came down to be more in the range of what middle class or upper middle class families were paying for cars anyway. So you're getting the Tesla brand at a discount of what you're anchored to, right? Which is much different than, Volkswagen owns Bugatti, or the last time I checked, and Bugatti's those are $1 million cars, but it's not a Volkswagen Bugatti. Bugatti's its own brand, right? That's its own separate thing. But that part aside, nobody talks about that with these metaphors, but that part aside, if you have like the Volkswagen brand, Volkswagen, people wagon, right? Volk is folk. It's just for common people, right? That's how they spun it off after World War II and all that. But anyway, the Volkswagen Jettas, Beetles, these kinds of things, these aren't like high-level vehicles. Now, if Volkswagen came out with some kind of supercar and they were like, this is the Volkswagen whatever, it's different because you've taken a kind of like a cheaper brand and you're trying to make the luxury premium version of that. It's just different. The people who are buying Jettas and Golfs and these kinds of things aren't really the sports car buying types. So it's hard to move them into a different offer. It's just hard. Whereas the other, even if you're not a sports car buying type, but Tesla comes out with that, and now you're like, well, I want a piece of that, and you want a family sedan or whatever, you can get the Tesla that's made for families. It's just a different decision. It's different framing. So if you start with community acupuncture, you're framing people with that Volkswagen Jetta Golf kind of place, which there's nothing wrong with that. But the trouble is when you try to move them up into sports car territory of like, well, we need to be doing some one-on-one sessions, and you need private room for that. The logistics aren't set up. I need you on a table face down. That means a private room. That means there's a higher price. You're going to get friction because you've trained people on Volkswagen stuff and you're trying to sell them a Tesla. So this happens, right? And we're going to, you burn the first batch of pancakes, and this is how we learn. I've burned a lot of pancakes, so the people here under my umbrella benefit from my experience of all these things I've fucked up. But what you do is then you start putting systems in place for the next generation of people, the next generation. So basically, like coming here, learning all this stuff, I want to accelerate your development so that you're not making the same mistakes I was, which means the things I implemented, year 5, year 10, year 15, whatever, my practice, those are the things that you are able to implement like now with that advantage. And one of those would be the way you frame everything. So if you have a community clinic that's not just a community clinic and you also have hybrid rooms, you may want to have a discussion about treatment plans up front. Stop selling visits, even if it's sliding scale, and start getting people focused on a plan, even if it's sliding scale, because you're going to get more long-term thinking that way. So one of the ways to preempt this is like, listen, we have this kind of community clinic and we also have the private rooms. Here's the difference. The private rooms are for places I need to get. Sometimes we have to get locally on your back or whatever else. And I can't do it in a recliner. It's not a community session. There's a different price for that. You want to let people know that the community acupuncture isn't meant to solve their problem. It's meant to help you figure out what kind of acupuncture will solve their problem. This is big. This is a huge distinction. So if you can solve the problem in a recliner, you will find out by doing community acupuncture. You can keep the price low. They can come. They can be happy. Some people, as we find, their problem doesn't get solved in a recliner, and that's how we're learning. So this is a way to filter where you need to be in your treatment might be in this private room. That's one way to start having the conversation. You need to frame it right. You're not solving their problem. You're helping them figure out what kind of acupuncture is going to solve their problem. The answer may be a private room for some cases. And there is a different price for that, different fee. They're going to have to make their decision about if that makes sense or not. Another way to look at this is setting up that first initial visit with a plan and saying, here's how we do it. Every third treatment or whatever is in the private room. Once a month, you have a private room session. The rest of your treatments are going to be in the community room. That private room session gives you an opportunity to start getting into motor points and whatever else you want to do, and they will feel the difference. They will already be bought in to doing some private room from the get-go. Most of their treatment's going to be subsidized because they're not paying so much for the follow-ups because they're in a recliner, but they will get that private room once a month or whatever. Like, take this idea and make it fit how you practice. But the main thing is that you're getting people who think they belong in a recliner. You're kind of putting them in a situation where they're in a private room at least once in a while so they can feel that. They don't have to make a decision like, oh, the private room, I don't know what happens in there. You're trying to sell me on something. No, they're in there anyway. It's just going to be a matter now of saying, you know how when you come in for the private room sessions, it seems like the results are better than when you come in for the recliner, don't you think? Like maybe we need to focus on a few more of those, and yeah, there's a different charge for that, whatever, but it's going to get you where you want to go faster. It's these kinds of conversations, it's this kind of framing, and this is one of 10,000 things we could be doing with the practice, right? But this is a small tweak to get people more open to a more comprehensive solution. Because the danger is we go low on price, which means we have like these shallow solutions. That's not always true. A lot of people get very much better in community acupuncture. Very, very much. I mean, it can be life-changing stuff. But we don't want to be limited by that model. Unless you want to just be the community acupuncture person and you're referring out for people to go get motor points and stuff like that. But it sounds like if you want to be treating, those things like this question's asking, you can't frame people and put them in the community bucket and then try to later on try to pull them out into something higher, right? It'd be different if you're the other way. If you frame people into the one-on-one bucket and later on you said, I think we could solve all this with the community room based on how you're responding. Actually, it's a lot less money. You can take people down. They'll be very happy to take you up on that offer. Taking them up, there's more friction. So you have to start with them up. Build in a treatment plan. Okay, it's, you got neck pain or migraines or low back pain or sciatica or whatever. I mean, sciatica, like, yeah, sure, you can be a distal champion, but I mean, there's nothing like going into GB29, GB30, hitting those motor points, getting everything moving for the sciatica patients, getting into their low back, at the nerve roots, coming out the lumbar, hitting them with some E-stim. Like, there's nothing like that feeling. So you want people to start tasting that straight away. And maybe even their first visit is in a private room. Maybe that's how you structure it. We do your first actual treatment in a private room, bing, bing, bing. We'll put you then in the community room. They feel that, and they just know that maybe every other visit they're in a private room, or one of every 3, or once a month, or once every 2 weeks, or whatever. You've got these kind of punctuated appointments where they're coming in for that. Then they'll feel it and they'll know what it is. You don't have to sell them on it because they already know what it is. They're already experiencing it. And then if you say, hey, I think we need to increase the percentage of private room visits, there's a fee that goes with that, yes. But they know because they feel it. And if it doesn't make that much of a difference to them, they also will know. And they'll say, well, actually, I get about the same results in the recliner. I think I'll stick to that. Because it's not about you arm twisting somebody into your higher offer. It's not your incentive. That doesn't matter, your financials or whatever. It's what's best for them. And you put them in a position where they can make a clean decision.